The Trump campaign, like many others before, is asking one question for the election. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Well, we may have an answer to that. So now, this is an analysis of economic data. It was done by journalist David K. Johnston. And what he did is he broke down how the economic policies of the Trump administration have benefited all Americans across this socioeconomic spectrum. And so I'm just going to kind of put it out there in answer to the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It really depends on what part of the socioeconomic spectrum that you belong in. If you were already wealthy coming into 2016, well, then you're probably doing pretty good. If you were not wealthy coming into 2016, well, then you're doing worse. And again, this is all according to data. So now the analysis points out that more than half of all Americans actually had to make ends meet in 2018 on less money than 2016. And understand this is actually of data before the coronavirus pandemic. So this is when we were not having a massive economic downturn as well as virus. So now the nearly 87 million taxpayers making less than $50,000 a year actually had to get by in 2018 on $307 less per household than in 2016, the year before Trump took office. So look, $307. That's that's part of your rent, right? Or that's food. If you have, small family, right? Odds are larger families of four, are spending a lot more on food, or it's part of an insurance payment. It's car insurance, things like that, right? That's a significant amount of money. And yet, even though we have inflation, people are doing, are still expected to do the same with less money. And this is, again, after the massive Trump tax cuts have gone into effect. And so that's not good. In reality, 57% of American households were better off under the Democrats, under Barack Obama. And you guys remember, I have made videos talking about how people were not doing great under Obama either. And they're worse under Trump. So, not really the best economy ever for working and middle class people. But as you're going to see, it's been awesome for the rich. Awesome. All right. So, the number of households enjoying incomes of $200,000 or more actually soared by more than 20%. The number of taxpayers making $10 million or more soared by 37% to a record 22,112 households. So you have a gigantic boom in billionaires, people making over $10 million a year. While the middle class, by the way, shrinks. Now, the Trump Republican tax cuts were highly concentrated up the income ladder, with hardly any tax savings going to the working poor, and only actually a small amount going to the middle class. Those making $50,000 to $100,000 a year, for example, paid just 3/4 of 1 percentage point less of their incomes to federal government. People making $2 million or $2.5 million saw their effective tax rate fall by about 3 times that much. So now, that said, a lot of people will still look at Republicans and Donald Trump and say, hey, man, look, Republicans are just better on economics. I mean, the economy's better under Republicans. Taxes are better under Republicans. Republicans are just better stewards of the economy. Well, if that's the case, how come every time a Republican has taken office, at least in the last 2 decades, we've ended up with a recession? Look, George W. Bush had the 2008 financial crisis, right? 2007, 2008. Obama inherited that and turned it around. And now, and I can't fault Donald Trump for coronavirus. I can fault him for his response, but for the appearance of coronavirus and for how bad it's gotten, yes, I can definitely blame Donald Trump, as well as the economic downturn as a result of Donald Trump, of the coronavirus under Trump. And so again, here we have another Republican administration where we end up with a massive economic crisis. Great. Fantastic. And so now, here's the other thing, right? Uh, People have a bit of a weird idea, and this correlates to what I was saying, right? People have a weird idea of what the middle class actually is. Because if you're a middle class person and you're saying, "Oh no, Trump's made my life better," well, like, are you actually middle class? What does that even mean? So now, if you ask Americans, 6 in 10 Americans say, "Yeah, I'm a member of the middle class," or "I'm even part of the upper middle class. I'm doing really good." Now, 87% of Americans who make at least $90,000 a year, interestingly enough, say that they are part of the middle class and are not wealthy. Now, look, if you're in the big cities, $90,000 to $100,000, that won't stretch too far, right? And I can totally understand that. But for the rest of the country, well, that's different. So now here's some more numbers that kind of show that nobody really understands what middle class means, right? Now, 46.5% of Americans make less than $30,000 a year. Now, yet, at the same time, most people will agree that you're no longer considered poor if you make at least $30,000 a year. So understand what $30,000 a year is. It's the equivalent of $15 an hour. $15 an hour is a living wage, right? It is the minimum that you need to survive without government assistance. That is not middle class. I mean, at the very least, it's maybe lower middle class. I would consider that working class, to be honest with you, because you are working and you're finally just barely out of poverty. But you're still in a lot of danger of falling back into it. And so $15 an hour, not very much. That's what the minimum wage should be, at least. And you could definitely make the argument that no, actually, our minimum wage should be somewhere around $22 to $23 an hour. And yes, as some of you do point out, that it does matter a lot where you live. Again, in the big cities, $100,000 is not going to get you very far. But where I live, for example, $100,000, you're doing pretty damn good, right? And so again, it's pretty reasonable, or I should say, it's pretty regional, right? So now, again, though, I think with a lot of the country, you have, that $15 an hour not getting you very far. I mean, you've got health insurance, the prices for that rising. You have the prices for college that have gone up over, 1,300% since the 1960s. You have the rise of prices for consumer goods. So when it comes down to it, $15 an hour in a lot of places is not enough. And as of September 2018, by the way, Pew reported that 52% of American adults were actually in the middle class, according to 2016 income figures. Now, again, Pew has a specific example of what they consider to be middle class. They define it as those earning between 2/3 and double the median household income. This Pew classification means that the category of middle class is made up of people making somewhere between $40,500 and $122,000 every year. So that's annually. So if we're using that classification, and again, there's many others, right? What most people see as you getting into the middle class, making at least $30,000 a year, is actually not part of the middle class, that you're actually part of the working poor. And so the problem is, I think, when it comes to making these declarative statements about, I'm going to help the middle class, what do you define as the middle class? I have seen politicians on the Republican side consider $100,000 to $200,000 a year middle class. And I guess if that, maybe applies in New York or California, might not apply anywhere else. And so it really does not have a definitive answer to what is middle class. Nobody really seems to know. So then understand that if you think about it in those terms, like, what do you define as middle class? When you hear a politician talking about middle class tax cuts and how they're going to be so great for you, how you're going to save so much money, if you're one of the people making $30,000 a year, you're you're not part of that middle class, even though technically you might be, according to someone's definition. You're really not going to benefit from those tax cuts, at least not as much as somebody making $100,000 a year or more. So understand, like, it's kind of complicated, but understand too that this might explain Trump's popularity with those who think that the Republican tax cuts were meant for them, or when really they were meant mostly for high earners. And so, as a result, by the way, of those tax cuts, less people paying taxes in the system, you're going to have a cut in services, which are going to hurt the people making $30,000 or $35,000 a year. And so that's what the numbers illustrate, is that people who are not making that much are not benefiting from the Trump economy, while rich people, while wealthier people, especially in the cities, weirdly enough, places like New York and LA, rich people are doing fantastic in those areas, those generally more liberal areas. And yet, and I can't really call Silicon Valley liberal, to be fair, but people in rural areas are not seeing any benefit from Donald Trump and the Republicans' economic policies. And so that's interesting, right? So now there's another piece of this, right, which really kind of translates into how well wealthy people are doing compared to everyone else. Wealthier people are getting away with paying no taxes. In fact, Congress has cut, along with, of course, the White House, IRS staffing so deeply that it cannot pursue high earners that have just decided to stop filing taxes. In fact, in the 3 years ending in 2016, according to the report, the IRS identified 879,415 high-income Americans who did not bother to file a tax return. These people who did not pay taxes, which would be, of course, cheating on your taxes, owed an estimated $45.7 billion in taxes, according to the Treasury Inspector General for the Tax Administration. So this was back in a May 29th report from the Treasury Inspector. So they have cost the government nearly $46 billion just because, I don't feel like paying my taxes. Now, one of the people, by the way, who was criminal investigation by the IRS, was one of the Koch brothers. This was William Ingram Koch, right, who lived one door away from Mar-a-Lago. He got more than $1 million a year tax-free. So that's what he was earning. He didn't pay a damn thing in taxes when it came to that. That's amazing. And by the way, as soon as Trump assumed office, the IRS dropped the case immediately. I don't know if that's, a direct result of Donald Trump, but it could be a direct result of his actions in making sure to cut funding so that these, agencies are no longer able to function. Billions of dollars. And interestingly enough, Republicans want to blame the deficit on social programs for the poor. And most recently, by the way, on COVID-19 relief, which unsurprisingly, when it came to COVID-19 relief, where did most of that money go? Oh, it went to the wealthiest Americans and corporations, of course. And then, Republicans, as I said before, gave a lot of money to the rich. What did they do for regular people? One $1,200 check. The elimination of interest on student loans, which, by the way, that actually is pretty good, so that you don't have to pay any interest in student loans. So you could theoretically make some significant dents in your student loan bills if you had money to put towards them. Problem is, a lot of people don't. Millions of people have filed for unemployment. They're no longer getting the $600 benefit, which means that there is about 8.3 million people who are jobless, who can't afford their bills, and you have a massive spike in evictions and homelessness. And so that's a bit of a disaster, right? And so understand that Republicans are blaming the deficit, the increase of the deficit, on mostly trying to help poor people, when in reality, a very, very small amount of money went towards helping people uh, be able to survive during this crisis. And so, that said, I would also caution people to watch out for Trump's deferment of payroll taxes. So that's one thing the administration decided to do, right? That was one of Trump's executive actions. He says, "Well, you know what? I'm going to defer your payroll taxes. That means you're going to save money, right?" In reality, you're actually not going to save a whole lot of money. You're not going to actually save any money, because those payroll taxes, they're just deferred, which means you have to pay more in payroll taxes next year when you file. So you're actually going to owe more in those payroll taxes, while again, you have people that are just deciding not to file taxes at all on the upper income spectrum. And the administration is not going to go after them. They're going to let tax cheats get away with it, while you end up having to pay more in payroll taxes. And so, not only that, but it's going to be really tough to repay that, because your wages have not kept up. According to the analysis, the share of American income from wages and salaries fell significantly, from almost 71% in 2016 to less than 68% in 2018. And again, that's not accounting for 2019 or what's happening today. And the number of households, by the way, as that is happening, making over $1 million and more and paying no income, went up by 41%, thanks to the Trump tax law. That's 556 additional households now making an average of $3.5 million, while not contributing at all to the federal government. And again, with coronavirus, things have actually gotten much worse. I mean, we have food banks that are maxed out. They have lines going around the block because people can't feed themselves. And so, if you're one of the millions of people that are now living in this reality, I think it's fairly obvious now that you can see how much you're being screwed by this administration. The question is that once you realize that, what are you going to do about it?